So I look after digital imaging here at Adobe in the UK. That primarily covers the digital imaging products, so Photoshop Elements, Lightroom, but also Creative Cloud, and also looking after and working with the team around workflows around Creative Cloud, and we'll come on to that in a little while. So Adobe released Creative Cloud and launched Creative Cloud as a concept last year. And as you've probably seen over the past year, we have made significant improvements to the cloud. One major improvement after release was in December, when we made a big drop of Photoshop updates into the cloud as well. And I'll talk about them as we get to them a little bit later in the presentation. But what I really want to do is talk about what's in the cloud and what you actually get for the subscription. The idea that you can add value to your customer across many applications and many tools and services in the cloud is really what we're trying to provide and support you guys to do that. So for example, in my world, if you're a wedding photographer and the bride suddenly says to you, well, I would actually like to have some video, and maybe I'd like to have the front page of my DVD or the front screen of my DVD to be animated with some doves and birds and this type of thing. Previously, if someone had just got a copy of Photoshop, that'd be quite tricky. If now, for example, with being a member of Creative Cloud and subscribing to the service, means that those people can offer those services to their clients by doing a little bit of learning on how those products work, because they may not know how they work. So for example, they may want to do some editing in Premiere Pro. They can do some training on Premiere Pro using Adobe TV or other training partners that we work with, and they can have a deep dive in Premiere Pro and learn how to cut. They may want to do some animation in After Effects as part of the DVD front cover. They can do that very easily, and they can take all their assets from Photoshop into those products as well. So it really is providing an ecosystem of applications and natural workflows that work across the creative world. So from a point of view of tooling, and I'm going to show you a demonstration of the cloud in a few minutes, but from a point of view of tooling, all the applications that you need that were available in Master Collection are available as part of Creative Cloud, plus others. So we saw that people want to use imagery and photography as part of the cloud as well, so we put Lightroom inside the cloud. We also have lots of tools around web and web products, web creation, web content authoring and publishing. We also have many different applications in there, which I'll talk to in a bit of a while as well. But it's really around all the applications available to you whenever you need them, and they're just downloaded. We know exactly what the applications you're missing are on the computer, so we can tell you that as part of the application manager, and then you can download them. The download sizes are pretty quick across a good connection, so you can download a copy of Photoshop in about 5 or 6 minutes and be ready to go, and you're running. So that leads me on to serial numbers. So serial numbers now are stored within the cloud. So once you've registered for the cloud and got a cloud subscription, your serial numbers for all the products are stored in the cloud. We just manage that entry point. So you log in with an Adobe ID. That Adobe ID gives you access to all those applications. You log into that portal and you can bring them down. Of course, there's many benefits over things like Master Collection with Creative Cloud. And one of them, which I use a lot, is the Sync Store Share. And that's really around having a Creative Cloud desktop synchronization with the cloud-based services. So if you've heard of cloud before, you're probably thinking, well, everything's going to run inside a browser, because that's typically how people use the cloud. Adobe's a bit different. Because we have these desktop applications that run on a local computer, we want to keep them because that's where the horsepower is and that's where creatives like to live. So what we have is really something like a hybrid cloud. So you have assets and storage inside the cloud as well as your apps and your training material, and actually on your desktop you have all the applications that you can use. A way to get content from your desktop to the cloud is using a synchronization mechanism. It's a bit similar to Dropbox if you ever use Dropbox, but the benefit is it's secure. So it's using 256 encryption on an AES protocol. You also, as part of Creative Cloud for Teams, you actually get more storage than what's labeled on the screen. This is for members. This is for members who have just got their on their individual accounts. But as a Creative Cloud for Team, you get 100 gigabytes of storage, and that gigabytes of storage is used for storing content, which could be any content. It could be creative content, but it could also be zip files going out to a client. It could also be content on a blog or links off a blog. It could be anything you kind of want. The other element as well is having an ability to share, comment, and download those assets as well. And I'll show you that when we get into the demonstration. One of the key value points of the Creative Cloud is having access to something called Digital Publishing Suite. And Digital Publishing Suite enables you to create content. And when I say content, what I actually mean by that is mixed media content. And you'll see this is where all the applications kind of fit together. So you have text that you may have pulled together in InDesign. You may have video that's been put together using Premiere Pro, or maybe a combination of After Effects. You've got some Photoshop files in there, maybe even files from Lightroom. Then you're able to collect that content and put a story around it and create a digital tablet application that you can then push out onto an iPad. So you can then take that content from InDesign, and within inside InDesign itself, you can publish that out to our digital publishing server, which is highly scalable, and we have big clients using it. For example, in the UK, we have the Mail. They use that for their electronic newspaper. Also, Condé Nast, all their magazines run across the digital publishing suite. So it's an industry standard way of doing it, but it also supports an enterprise, so it means it's very reliable and highly reliable. We also have something called Business Catalyst inside the cloud that enables you to host up to five websites on the cloud as well, with that plumbing embed. So if you are building something with what we'll talk about later with the HTML services, you're able to plug that into the back of Business Catalyst. Then you have something called Typekit, and Typekit is, if you like, multiple font foundries that have been pulled together, enabling you to put fonts onto your web-based applications, but use them across the Typekit. So you're not embedding fonts in the website, you're not actually getting them from a type foundry, you're getting them from Creative Cloud, and you get access to those fonts via the Creative Cloud. The real benefit, however, of the Creative Cloud for Teams is the fact that any new updates that come out in the software will automatically be ready for you to download. So there's a little A that sits in the top of the toolbar on a Mac, or if you're in a Windows machine at the bottom of the dock. And if you have new updates to the products, they will appear there and enabling you to download them. Now, in December, we released a big drop. We did some work in Photoshop, and we put some more functionality on the side, something called Smart Objects, which I'll talk about as we go into Photoshop. But those updates came in as part of Creative Cloud as the update for you to update them, and they're ready to go. There's also training available, as I mentioned before, and there's also a support mechanism inside Creative Cloud for Teams. Now, Creative Cloud for Teams is slightly different. You also get access to something called a deployment manager or a packager. And that packager, if you work in a small company or even in a mid-sized company, will enable you as an administrator, or if you have an administrator, to get the cloud packager and package up the apps that your users need and be able to roll those applications out onto their users' desktops. They still need to serialize with the internet and make sure their Adobe ID is working, but it means you can roll it out and roll the updates out in one fell swoop, so your administrator can look after your IT demands of the Creative Cloud. So let's go into the Creative Cloud itself and show you exactly what we have. I'm just going to close this down. I was doing a little bit of work, as you see, before we came online. I just want to open a new window. And I'm going to go into the Creative Cloud account. So when you log into Creative Cloud, you get a screen, which I don't think you're seeing very well at the moment. Oh, it's just building up, I'm not sure why, there's a bit of a delay there. But you get a full screen which shows you Creative Cloud. This is the portal, if you like, to your cloud-based service. You need Adobe ID, so that's the first thing you need when you're talking about Creative Cloud for Teams or Creative Cloud for Membership. You have Adobe ID which logs you into your account. So let's log in there now with my ID. We are courtesy at adobe.com and sign in. Once you sign in, that brings up the portal of the Creative Cloud. And you can see clearly at the top, it's organized by how you may need to access the applications. So for example, the first thing you'll probably do after you've installed all the apps is work with your files. And you can see there, you've got the folders and files, okay? You can have a combination of two, obviously, in each folder or file scenario. If I just pop into one of those files now, okay. So here, for example, is a RAW file. That's a Canon RAW file. So we're able to render a Canon RAW file natively inside the Creative Cloud servers. So we then run our raw converters on that and enable that to be displayed. Notice, however, you also be able to pull the colors out of it and create a color swatch. That color swatch is then able to be downloaded and brought into Illustrator or brought into Photoshop. You can also pull that into Cooler as well and get those assets into Cooler. You can also, while you're here, you can also enable commenting on this asset as well, which is more powerful when you start to share this asset with other people. So talking about sharing, I'm able to share this asset with another user and I can send them a link. At the current time, it will send them just a link to the file. So if I open that send link up, you'll see there the CR2 file. I can enable it for public or private view. I can allow comments and I can allow downloading. I can send an email to a user or I can send them the link. And the link I can copy and put into an email, or I can just send the link straight from Creative Cloud. But that is now public and able to anyone to access as long as they have the URL. Like I say, all our content is secured as well. Once you do share that with another user, they're able to download it if they've got download access. But you can also search across the Creative Cloud as well, or you can rename that content, or you can archive the content. If I go back and look at other benefits of the Creative Cloud itself, you can see if I go into a PDF that's stored on my Creative Cloud, so we're able to show the PDF and the final render. We're also able to show the number of pages inside the PDF, and we can navigate between the pages using the arrows on the left and the right, and I can navigate between those two pages. You can also again see the color swatches that come out, and it actually gives you a recommendation of the applications that you might need if you want to work with this file. It tells you the file size and everything else you may need to know about the file. If you're working on more complex assets and more complex files, for example Illustrator. Illustrator, as you may know, has got a concept of artboards where your big board, your main board can be sliced into different sections. We recognise each artboard and we're able to take each artboard out and have it rendered as a separate page. So this will display the artboard. You can see here this is page 1 of 3, and you can see the colour swatch again for each one. It recommends Illustrator this time to open up the Illustrator file. So we're rendering all these files in the server so that you see them visually and your clients will see them as well. Okay. If we look into the applications, and we can go through all the applications that you have as part of Creative Cloud, any new things that happen in Creative Cloud, because as I mentioned, this is a service that will continue to grow. Okay, so what there is at the current time is not the final solution. This will grow, and one of the benefits of having a subscription to the service is that you're going to get access to those new features as they come available. So one of those features which is really exciting for me with working with photographers and designers and general creatives is the company that we bought in December last year. So we bought a company called Behance, and the Behance community, if I just go to the Behance community, I can show you that. If the Behance community, let me just show you a couple of portfolios. The Behance community is a way that I can put my content online. So for example, I'm also a photographer and I like to get my work out there and show people. So this is a project I did recently in Chernobyl, and it's a documentary of the actual town of Pripyat that was abandoned 27 years ago. So I want to tell a story. So I've uploaded my images, and as I navigate through, you can see those images are being displayed. But I can also, about my project, I can manage my own projects, manage my own collections, and I can look at other pieces of work. I can take other pieces of the community work and pull them in together as well. So what you're getting is a value add, and this is all free as part of the Creative Cloud subscription. I also have access to a pro site, which is my website. So I can actually have my website on the Creative Cloud full of my imaging portfolio. So for example, if I just go to publish and look at my live site, you can see my live sites there, which is going to give me access. So everything in my portfolio will come through to my website and be displayed. So anything I add will automatically come through as well. So it's a really nice way, and these can be completely customized. So all the HTML, the JavaScript, and the CSS can be completely customized if you need that to be so. And you can see here in the applications view as all the applications. So for example, you've got Photoshop you can download, as we mentioned before, but you've also got things like Prelude and SpeedGrade. So again, SpeedGrade is another company that we acquired a couple of years ago actually now, and that product used to retail for $45,000 per seat. So we bought the company because we heard from the community that people wanted to do color grading. So we bought the company and we put the product out as part of the Creative Cloud. So you're getting some real big value by becoming a Creative Cloud or Creative Cloud for Team member. Then of course, if you're a Touch app user, so you're using Photoshop Touch on the iPhone or the iPad or the Android devices, or maybe using Adobe Ideas, those file formats are slightly different from the main formats because you've got a limited power and a limited device. So in the Photoshop world, you've got something called PSDX files. PSDX is a mobile version of Photoshop. So the Touch app plugins are a way to cross the bridge and be able to have your Photoshop Touch files to be open across onto Photoshop. Now, that's really beneficial because it means that if I'm using Creative Cloud, I'm using Touch apps, there's a workflow here which is around working with my Touch applications and doing some comps, maybe offline or online or wherever I am on the train or wherever I am, to sketch some ideas up when I get to the office. So I'm on the go all of the time. All those applications are linked to the Creative Cloud. So whatever I do on those applications will automatically be synchronized to the Creative Cloud. Because my desktop sync is linked to my local computer or any computers that I have in my Creative Cloud, any assets that go up from my Touch applications will go across the cloud automatically into my local desktop for editing. And you can see there that my Creative Cloud is going blue. It's synchronizing something, okay? So if I've got it synchronized there, it'll tell me it's synchronized and then download it, and also tell me what's been downloaded with a pop-up on the screen on the side, which is non-intrusive. The Agent services, the Adobe Agent services, are available just in the Creative Cloud at this current time. And I'll just run them very quickly. So you've got something called Edge Animate. Edge Animate is used for animating HTML5 applications. Edge Code is used to look at preview of code when you're building it to HTML or CSS or JavaScript. Then you've got Edge Reflow. Edge Reflow is designed around creating multiple screens and multiple formats to show how a responsive design will work across multiple formats to make sure you've got all your bases covered. And then we mentioned Typekit, and we've also got PhoneGap. PhoneGap is a way of building HTML, CSS and JavaScript sites, be able to upload that into the PhoneGap builder, and the PhoneGap builder will then deploy them onto those devices so they'll run native on those devices. And then of course there's other services which I mentioned as well. So the other services are the Creative Cloud files, which we showed you a little bit earlier, Business Catalyst for hosting those websites. If you're a film editor, you might want to write scripts. And if you're writing scripts, you can use something called Story Plus. And Story Plus is a screen editor, and the workflow there is a screenwriter. And the workflow there is that you can write content in Story, and then you can put that across the cloud and appear inside Premiere Pro and have that as your cut manager. And it actually appears in all of the video products as well. Got digital publishing single edition, which we mentioned earlier. Got the Behance network and the ProSite network. And then of course you've got the Touch apps available. There are also 2 more Touch apps available for your Behance application. So you've got Behance for the iPhone, which I use a lot for showing clients or for users, but you've also got the Creative Portfolio. So if you have created your portfolio on Behance, you can then have that pushed to your phone and show you just the assets inside your portfolio. So you can see there's a whole raft of apps and services and technology and storage and everything as part of your subscription. So there's much more value than what we had with just Master Collection and just the apps. And really that's really around the way that we see creative workflows are changing, and there's much more reliance upon different applications and that natural flow of content across those applications, but also supporting how you ingest that content and how you export that content out onto different platforms like the iPads or whatever, and make use of those new technologies. So we mentioned earlier that some new features came in Photoshop as part of CS6. So in December, we put a drop into Creative Cloud, and that drop added some more benefits onto the cloud. So let's just go into Mini Bridge for a second. Let's go open this file in Camera Raw. We obviously modified some of Camera Raw as part of the Raw update. So inside Camera Raw, I just want to reset and make sure this is set to 0. We modified Camera Raw to do some more work on raw images, especially around highlights and shadows. So the highlights and shadows now are really designed to pick up and manage all the highlights in the image, and the shadows are designed to pull out all the shadows in the image. And you can see that as I pull a shadow slider across to the right, all these shadows come into the picture and all the highlights come into the picture. That gives you a huge dynamic range. So it's almost enabling you to have like a HDR image without having shot multiple bracketed sequences. Then of course you've got the clarity slider, and clarity slider enables you to boost up mid-tone contrast without sharpening. And this is a much more, it's much more finer than it was in Lightroom 3. And then on some of the filters, we made some modifications. So for example, on the gradient filter, we now include every single adjustment on the gradient filter. So if we pull in a gradient filter, you can see that as I pull it in, it's changing the sky, and that's because the exposure is dialed down. So let's put the exposure right up to where it should be, and let's change the temperature. So I can now change the temperature on a graduated filter, which is great if you're working in a mixed lighting scenario, okay? And you can change it to be a nice evening sky or a nice morning sky very, very quickly, non-destructive before you bring it into Photoshop. And then you can bring it into Photoshop and work on that content. You've also got the adjustment brush, and in the adjustment brush you've got exactly the same controls, so you can modify the temperature and the exposure and the tint and the clarity and shadows all independently of each other. So that's a kind of a major boost to Camera Raw. Just going to open up a file here, which is a Canon file actually. I'm going to open up in Camera Raw. So I'm sure there's many people out there using Photoshop who are using something called Smart Objects. And Smart Objects is a way to embed the content into, if you like, an envelope. And that content is non-destructive. So whatever I do now to this file will be completely non-destructive. So if I put a new layer on here, for example, new adjustment layer, and I go into black and white and put a black and white layer on here, that converts to black and white. But I may have decided, and this isn't new in Photoshop, but it's actually quite a nice little trick to show Smart Objects and how they work, is that I may want to go back into the raw file and carry on my raw conversion. So by opening that up as a raw cut file, I can bring it back now into Camera Raw and work on my highlights and shadows as I did previously. That then goes and makes the modifications to the image and then updates the Smart Objects and all the layers around it. When CS6 was launched back in April time last year, we improved the performance of things like the Liquify filter and the Transform and Puppet Warp, and we moved them towards a graphics processor. So Photoshop's become much faster. It's really making use of modern architecture of computers and modern technology. Previously, it worked just on the CPU, so all the math was on the CPU, and it became quite intense for the CPU to manage. So by splitting out and reusing other resources like the graphics processor means that we can do more things in parallel. So the graphics processor now is managing and handling all that activity. So if, for example, we now go into the filters, we now have Liquify. Now the difference here is that when CS6 was released, Liquify wasn't available on a Smart Object, nor were the blur filters, nor was Puppet Warp. So we're able now, as part of the CS6 drop in as Creative Cloud December, we can now put Liquify on a Smart Object. But why is that important? Well, it's important because I can make an adjustment over here to the model's face, okay, and just pull that in as you would do with the Liquify tool and press OK. That will create a different set of features down here. It doesn't doesn't impact on the layer itself. It creates a filter on the layer, but it also creates a mask. At any point in time, I can turn on and turn off that smart filter. I can also go in at any point in time and modify the original Liquify layer. So I can go in there and remodify the Liquify layer. Okay, and make a few changes over there. That will go and update the Liquify object and reapply the smart object and reapply the black and white filter to it. I can then, obviously, if I've got my masks enabled, I can turn a mask on and very quickly move to the brush key, reset my foreground background colors, and then paint with black. And when I do that, obviously I can now paint out the effects of the Liquify onto the image. Okay, so it means I've got a completely non-destructive workflow when it comes around to using smart objects. The other benefit, of course, with smart objects is that it keeps the file size really low. Okay, I can also, as part of a smart object, wrap this up in a smart object and then use my blur filters on here as well. Let's just go into the blur filters very quickly so you can see those working. Let's pick up this one. So open that with, again, Camera Raw, and open this as a smart object. By default, it's a smart object coming from Camera Raw. If you turn that switch on, it's inside the Camera Raw. I can now place a blur gallery filter, so I can use a field blur, iris blur, or tilt shift blur. Let's pick an iris blur up. The iris blur will blur a circular part of the image or a square of the image, but I can move that around, where a tilt shift will actually look at the whole image in a horizontal or vertical motion and move outwards. This will move in a round circular filter, as you'll see in a second. So you can see that the new widget's been placed on the actual scene, and I can change the intensity of the blur by changing the blur ring. Okay, this is all also on the graphics processor, which means it's much faster, much more responsive. So it means I can move this around and get nice feedback from where that actually needs to be compositionally and make sure it makes some sense for that. I can also change the shape by moving the shape slider. I can also alter the feathering and move feathering around as well. Press the Alt key and the Alt key moves it individually. I can also add some light and play with light. So let's put some colour in and move some light in. And you can see that when I put light in, you can see how the end of the fishing rod changes. Now it's only working on a certain value of the highlights and the upper mid-tones. So I can change that to cover more of the mid-tone greys and actually make that look a bit more kind of odd. But I could add some effect into there, maybe some effects into the shadows, and just change the way that the light is reflecting and being used inside the scene. So you can use this for creative expression as well. Okay. Not sure if anybody out there is using any 3D features, but we made some adjustments to 3D. So let me just open this 3D picture here. So we made some adjustments to 3D. So 3D in Photoshop now is pretty good, and as part of CS6 we overhauled the whole of the 3D engine. So if I just turn on the Move tool, you can see here that the whole of that text that we have on that background is all 3D rendered. And I can see that 3D layer over here. I can also explore the 3D layer and look at what's inside that 3D layer here. So you can see and get an idea of the mesh and get an idea of what's in there from a point of view of the lights and everything else with my 3D. I've got properties I can modify. I can change the type, I can change the typeface, the colors, all that kind of thing that you'd expect to do, and also change the lighting. But inside the CS6 drop, so inside the Creative Cloud drop in December release, we changed the way we do the renderers in Photoshop. So now you need at least 512 meg of graphics memory to do that, and that's because we changed the ray tracing shader. And the ray tracing shader is now able to pull out much more information out of that rendered scene. And that also is impacted by the fact that we've implemented 32-bit color. And 32-bit color now on a 3D object can now render 32-bit reflections, but also 32-bit tones. So if I look at this is a final render in wood, which is much more, you see a little bit of diffused glow at the back, and you also see the tone and the texture of the wood is actually really quite nice. If I just turn that off a second, you see that a bit better, and zoom in. You can see there's really nice texture going on there when it comes down to that wood. If I turn the marble on, you can see there that the marble is now rendered nicely as well. If I was just going to show you let me just find another file. Just give me 1 second, guys. And just want to go into here. I want to open this one. So I mentioned before about 32-bit color. 32-bit color enables us to do this type of thing, which is apply glow to text. So when you put a light in, so this is an image-based light, when the image-based light is reflecting on the text is actually set to a 32-bit color, which increases its glow, and that will glow off the background, so it gives that kind of glowing effect. And that's something that was changed inside the CC Creative Cloud release inside December, which of course, if you were on Creative Cloud for Teams, you would get that by default. The other thing we've changed inside, or added inside Photoshop, I shouldn't say changed, but added inside Photoshop, is around CSS and CSS creation. So here's a very simple website design, and you can see on the right side here, let me just move this out of the way. You can see on the right side, we have all the layers of this comp. It's quite complex, there's a lot of things to it. I can use the layer search if I need to do, and that layer search will enable me to search through the layers of this palette quite easily, either search by color or by attribute or by mode. So I can search on if the mode is a multiply, and there are some multiply modes there, and it will show me just those as part of that. So if you're working on large comps, this is really great to use. I'll turn it off for a second. Now I'm going to launch something called Edge Code Preview. An Edge Code Preview is an editor, pull that there, is an editor that's built in HTML, JavaScript and CSS to enable you to build HTML websites, but it has an integration to a browser. So here's a very simple HTML page. And what I want to do now is, when I've got my asset, because most people use Photoshop for their comping of websites, previously before the Creative Cloud drop in December, you had to go to a designer, they would design the site maybe in Photoshop, and then you have to rework all the colors and all the code. What you can now do though is you can copy code from Photoshop straight into your CSS. So as part of, if we just go to the background here for a second, this background layer, you can see if I turn it on and turn it off, is just that color gradient. I can then copy the CSS and then go to my Edge Code Preview and paste the CSS in, and then go to my preview screen, and you'll see there, but dynamically it's put in that gradient for me. If I go to something like Hero, I look into Hero, I can copy CSS. It's a larger piece, so it's going to copy the CSS for me, and then go to my code preview and put that CSS in, and then go to my website, and you can see there it's changed the website for me. Okay, and if I just go into another one over here, the winter promo, the different way of doing it is also using copy CSS from the flyout menu. Again, it's a bit bigger, so it's just copying all the CSS for me. And this time I want to show you the effect. So show you the browser, show you the code. And I'm just going to pull this to the side and go to the end of here and then paste this in. And you should see as I do that, the look changes. So you can see that the change is now being made in real time. So as a designer, I can make use of my Photoshop comps directly into my Edge Code Builder into the website. Now for a completed look, let's just put a completed look in. So let's delete all of that, go back to 0 and get the completed version and just paste it in. You can see that website is now been put together. So you've got immediate responsive design when it comes down to having a look and feel generated straight out of Photoshop. We also supported, as part of the Creative Cloud update in December, high DPI. So if you're on a Mac and you're running a new Metadata screen, you're now able to see Photoshop in its full glory as a high definition, high display application, which is really, really quite beautiful. The other thing we have inside the Creative Cloud release in December is something called conditional actions. This conditional action enables you to put if statements inside the conditional action. So if it's part of a batch routine, and in this case we're testing for a square format, a landscape format, or a portrait format, inside the actual action itself, we've now got ifs. So we're testing here is if the document is a landscape document, then play landscape action, otherwise test for a square. So we test for the square, and inside the square we say, if it's a square, then play the square action, which will do the operation on a square object. If it's not, go to portrait. So you can see there that that's going to save me lots of time when it comes down to my actions by not having to have multiple actions based on multiple content, which again will save me lots of time when it comes down to batch processing of those images. You obviously have the Adobe website, and you also have some information there about me. There's my Twitter details and my blog details. So I'm pretty active on the digital imaging side of things of Adobe. So anything digital imaging related, more than happy to take those questions over Twitter or my blog. But thanks for listening, and it's been good. Thank you.